Hi, marketers. This is Dots, and welcome to the Marketing Leadership Podcast. With me here is Nancy Harhut, co-founder and chief executive officer at HBT Marketing. We will discuss behavioral marketing that drives customer acquisition and brand loyalty. I know you guys are ready, so let's do this. Nancy, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Dots. Thank you so much for having me.
No, absolutely, yeah. And I'm really, really excited to have you because I don't know if I didn't tell you this off the mic, but I have a knack for trying to read people's mind. So we'll see how that goes in this episode.
Oh, this is gonna be exciting. All right.
But before that, you want to tell us about yourself, your background, your role, how you come to rise in the marketing world, I should call it.
I like that characterization, how I've come to rise in the marketing world. Thank you very much. So I don't think it's quite as glamorous as that, but I will, I mean,
Uh,
tell you a little bit about myself, sure. Um, I started out as a marketing copywriter, and I'd been studying journalism in college and realized I was never going to be a great journalist. I looked around, I saw the other students. I said they're going to be good. I don't have that fire in my belly, but what I like to do is I like to write and I like to persuade people. And so I found my way
mm,
into marketing and began to, work at different marketing agencies. And one day I read Dr. Robert Cialdini's book, Influence the Psychology of Persuasion. I know you're familiar with it. We were talking a little bit off mic about it. It's a fabulous
yeah.
book. And when I was reading it, I'm sure like many people, I was underlining and making margin notes. And I was thinking about the clients that I was doing work for at the agency. And I'd read something and say, oh, maybe that would help me sell more newspaper subscriptions. And I would read something else and I would think, oh, maybe that would help me sell more credit cards or, whatever it turned out to be. And so I started to assimilate the information that I was reading and I started to
Mhm.
slowly test it. I always believe in using marketing best practices, per channel. So it could be email, it could be direct mail, it could be social media, it could be landing pages, whatever I happen to be working on, I'd want the best practices. But then I began to overlay the behavioral science and I started to see results. And then I had an opportunity to do a real head-to-head A/B test where we had a client who was, thinking, I don't know, well, we're not as happy with the results we've been getting. Is there anything that, you guys can do as our new agency? And so we took their piece and we put it head to head against our behavioral science infused piece. And we got a 459% lift over the control. And this was measured as sales, not lead generation, not inquiries, not downloading a white paper. This was actual sales. It was selling insurance, which is not an easy thing to sell. And that's when I
No.
knew I was hooked. I was like, all right, I had this hunch this worked. It felt right to me as a marketer, but now I've not only slowly tested it, but I've tested it, head to head, and, then there was no turning back, and so I began to apply it in what I was, working on. We began to talk to clients about it, and ultimately, about 6 years ago, I co-founded my own agency, HBT Marketing, and
Yeah.
the express purpose of the agency is to take marketing best practices, combine them with behavioral science, so that we
Mhm.
can increase the likelihood that the prospects and customers of our clients do what our clients want them to do. Dots, as you know, there's no magic wand, there's no silver bullet, there's no way we can make people do something all the time. If there were, you and I would both be, we'd have private islands in the Caribbean somewhere and we'd be
Sucking coconut milk.
sucking coconut milk, exactly. But as we know, we can't make people do anything, but we can increase the likelihood that they will, that they'll pay attention
Mhm.
to a marketing message, that they'll better understand the marketing message, that they'll be more inclined to remember it, and that they'll be more inclined to
Mhm.
respond to it. And that's what adding behavioral science to marketing allows us to do. That's what my company does, and it's been working very well. So, and then about a year and a half or so ago, a couple of years ago, Kogan Page, which is a London-based publisher, reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in writing a book about applying behavioral science to marketing situations. And I said yes. And here we have the book using behavioral science in marketing. And the rest is history.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're viewing, this is my copy. It's really great. And we'll be discussing a few of that, here on the episode. And speaking of Chardini's book, very voluminous book. I am an audiobook guy because with that, I'm able to read a book every week. Having to do that with work and stuff. But Chardini's book was between 15 and 20 hours. even I had to like fast forward and things like that. So guys, you want to, check that out. But most importantly, if you're a marketer, you want to check this book out by Nancy. Using behavioral science in marketing. I'm still reading it. I will not say I finished. But it's what I'm seeing so far is really, really interesting. In fact, I have one very important question ahead of this episode that I would like to, expand more about. But now back to your background. I see that you've done a lot of jobs in marketing leadership in itself. You own your own outfit. From a behavioral science perspective, I know most of your effort is focused on the customers, which is fine. However, I almost feel like stakeholders need to even be influenced themselves. Sometimes it's not about trying to influence customers, it's trying to influence stakeholders. Like you work in a corporation, I'm sorry to say this, but corporations and bureaucracy, they are sometimes um, rice and beans, very, very, similar. How do you use behavioral science to even influence stakeholders to agree with your idea? You're undergoing some digital transformation, for example. You're trying to run a creative campaign that will work. How do you have you even found yourself in a situation where you had to do certain things to truthfully, truthfully influence leadership in a way that they see, marketing from your perspective, not from their own perspective, which sometimes is sometimes very selfish.
Sure. It's a great question, and and it's I think it's an appropriate one because we know that behavioral science is all about the study of how people behave, how they make decisions, and the decision making shortcuts that they rely on. And behavioral scientists have told us that uh, people, men, women, young, old, rich, poor, very educated, not as educated, B2B environment, B2C environment, all people rely on these decision making shortcuts. We like to think that they're
Mm,
making these well thought out, well considered decisions, and sometimes they
mm,
are, but very often they're trying to conserve mental energy and they're just using a decision default or a decision making shortcut that helps them just get through the day more efficiently. And so while that's very important when we're talking about our end users, marketing to prospects and customers, it's also something that we can use just when we're dealing with um, the people in our lives, whether it's the stakeholders at a business, whether it's our friends and
mhm,
family. And so you're asking specifically about stakeholders. And I think there are three things that I have found can be helpful when I'm trying to convince a stakeholder to uh, pursue something that I'm recommending. And one of those is to tap into the authority principle. Ever since we were young, we've
mhm,
been taught to recognize and respect authority. So by the time we're adults, it's kind of ingrained in us. So when I'm trying to convince somebody, I try to point to an outside expert and make it not about what I think, but this is why I'm recommending it. It's because this outside person found this. So I'll quote a piece of research from Harvard or Yale or Stanford, or I'll quote a study that was done by another company, another campaign that they ran, and here were the results. So it's not just Nancy recommending that you take this approach. I can point to these outside experts, which I think makes people feel more confident taking my recommendation because they know that it's
mhm,
not just me saying something, but that I'm backing it up with evidence, with empirical research. So that's one thing. I think using that idea of the authority principle. I think the other thing that we can do is we can tap into something called commitment and consistency. And that is this idea that once people make a decision, they like to remain consistent with it when future opportunities arise. They don't like to be seen as someone who vacillates or flip-flops or goes back and forth. So if I'm
mhm,
trying to convince someone to do something, what I want to do is I want to think about a way to frame what I'm asking them to do as being consistent with their values, consistent with their previous actions. So, if I know that the person I'm talking to really supports environmental causes, for example, and I'm recommending that we do something with recycled paper. I would make sure
mm,
that I reference the fact that, you're a big supporter of the environment, and that's why
mhm,
I think you'll be particularly interested in this initiative. But trying to find that link between something that they've done in the past or that they've gone on record as supporting, and then you just make the thing that you're recommending consistent with the way they've previously behaved or with consistent with their image of themselves, the image they have of
Mhm.
themselves, and that can be very, very helpful. Um, and then I think there's probably a third way actually, and it's a very handy little technique, and it's using the phrase, "Would you be willing?" So instead of saying,
Ah.
"Dots, I think you should do this," or "Dots, you should really consider this," or "Dots, this is what you should be pursuing." Instead, I say, "Dots, would you be willing to consider this? Would you be willing to think about this?" And the reason that can be so effective, behavioral scientists have found, is because it switches the focus away from the thing that's being asked for, and it switches it to the person's character. And we all like to think that we're the kind of people that are open, that are willing to entertain different things, different viewpoints, new
Mhm.
ideas. We like to project that image. We like to think of ourselves that way. So instead of saying, you should do this or you should think about this, I ask if you'd be willing to. And invariably, people say yes. They like to be the kind of people that would be willing to consider something. And behavioral scientists have tested this in a variety of different industries and applications, everything from, people going through a divorce, would you be willing to consider mediation, all the way to, doctors recommending a particular course of treatment, would you be willing to?
Uh-huh.
And, you know, s- test after test after test indicates that you end up getting more compliance. More people will say yes, to your request when you phrase it that way. So I think those
Wow.
are 3 ways that we can influence stakeholders. We can, bring in, or point to outside experts. So there's a preponderance of evidence. It's not just me in front of you, but it's me backed by all of this research, all of these other examples, all of these experts. We can also talk about being consistent with the stand that you've taken, consistent with your previous behavior. So the thing I'm asking you to do is really just something you'd be doing anyway because it's the way, you believe, it's the way you see things. And then third, just this idea of saying, would you be willing to consider this? Because then it's about their character and not just about the item at hand. So those are, I think, 3 ways that your listeners can think about influencing stakeholders, as well as, their family members, their children, their friends. They're just great ways to get people to, maybe entertain what it is that you'd like them to do.
I like that. I think this top the second one in terms of being consistent with their own character is very common. So I will not drum too much about that. But the first idea is very cool from an authority perspective. I think I know it's true that a lot of marketers have some challenges with driving transformation or innovation. But however, I think also that they are not doing it the right way. So, some people might just send an email to pitch an idea where you're supposed to work on a massive deck, right? I do that here at Content Allies. I roll with my boss on a daily basis, the CEO. I should just chat him about this idea. But I thought, how about just making the whole thing complicated and giving him a deck with all the research and everything in there, which is what sort of got him to start considering the idea because I knew if I had done it casually, that probably may not work. So decks, reports, strategies, I think is something that works even internally. You might think it's nothing, but I think it's something that you could really, really use. The third one is really nice. Canada is known as a country where people apologize a lot, but it's also known as a place where we ask questions for requests. Um, even for something that is compulsory. Could you please come to work tomorrow? You know, you know. That's something I shouldn't be asking. And even if I'm asking you, I don't have to, you know, ask you in that way, right? Because you should come to work. But yeah, it's that really makes a lot of sense. I personally am on with the third one, even in terms of marketing outreach. I think people should think about making the call to actions very soft. So whenever I do my outreaches for this podcast, for example, I would say, tell me what you think. Instead of saying, let me know or something like that, get back to me as soon as possible. People don't like those hard call to actions anymore. They want something very soft, even though they understand exactly what you want from them. So I really, really like that. This is getting interesting already, by the way. But so which is good. Okay, next question. Um, I I would think that marketers are already executing some sort of behavioral marketing at some level. But my guess is that there are some kinds of marketing that they shouldn't be doing and that they shouldn't be doing. So, from your experience, what are some of the, I guess, myths around behavioral marketing? Let's just call it behavioral marketing. I think the term is sort of sticking out here, that you think marketers or marketing leaders need to stop doing, that they're already doing before. I don't want to give an example, but one of them is probably an annoying pop-up that you can't seem to close, for example.
Yes, yes. So yeah, I think it's, we could talk for days about things marketers shouldn't be doing. But I think with respect to behavioral science, what we found is there are certain tactics that work,
Mhm.
but just because they work doesn't necessarily mean we should be using them. So, um, uh, you know,
Really?
uh, like you said, pop up that won't close. It's like, all right, we know it's caught their attention, but we also know that there's going to be a negative impact on brand. Like if we're not treating our customers with respect, if we're not doing things responsibly as marketers, if we're not doing things ethically as marketers, we may get these short-term wins. We may, okay, they couldn't X out of the pop-up, so they signed up for a newsletter. We're like, great, I got a response. But in the long run, that erodes brand trust. And when brand trust has eroded, it can be very hard, if not impossible, to rebuild it. So any of the
Mm,
tactics that we're going to be talking about today, any of the tactics that you read about, regarding behavioral science, and these decision-making shortcuts that people rely on, we want to use them responsibly. So while the temptation may be to say, okay, oh, I don't know, today's the last day that you can take advantage of the sale, or there's only 3 of these left. We know that kind of urgency is going to increase response, right? People don't want to miss
yeah.
out. If there's only 3
Yeah.
left, I better get mine. If the sale is only today, I better
Yeah.
buy it today. And it's
Yeah.
fine if the sale is only today. And it's fine if there are only 3 left. We want to tell our customers that. That's actually providing a service to them. But if there's only 3 left, but really there's another 300 in the stock room, or if the sale is only today until tomorrow when there's also a sale, and then the next day,
Yes, yes.
then it's like, all right, we're using these tactics, but we're misusing them really. We're using them improperly, and that's not a good thing to do. I also think with respect to behavioral science, sometimes what happens is somebody will try a particular tactic, and when it doesn't
Mhm.
work, they say, "Okay, it doesn't work for me. Behavioral science is not what I'm gonna add to my marketing." And it could be that you
Mm,
just chose the wrong tactic for your particular message, for your particular target market. It could be that
mhm.
you didn't execute it properly, and so, I caution people who are, exploring behavioral science to give it a fair shake, to really give it a chance, and don't just try something once and say, "Oh, I didn't get the fabulous lift in response I was hoping to get, therefore it's not for me." It takes a little bit of time and effort to figure out what's gonna work best for your message, for your market, for your timing. And then I think the other thing people have to worry about is misapplying certain principles. For example, we know about social proof, and we know that,
Mhm.
when people are uncertain of what to do, they look to others, they follow their lead. So social proof can be very, very powerful. However, sometimes marketers misapply it. So imagine I'm selling, life insurance, and I say,
Mhm.
"Dear Dots, too many people wait before they buy life insurance. That's why you should buy it now at a young age." Well, what people are going to get from that statement is, oh, I haven't bought any yet, but a lot of people like me haven't bought any yet, so I'm fine. Right? It's like, well, I have the social proof in there, but no, you sent the wrong message with the social proof.
Yeah, exactly.
Underscored the opposite of what you wanted to do. So I think that there are all things that we need to think about. There are sometimes counterintuitive tactics that we can use. Sometimes in marketing, we try so hard to convince people to do what we want them to do, which makes sense. But it turns out that at the end of the day, if we remind people that they're free to buy or to not buy, that can actually increase response. And you think about it in marketing, we talk about our product, we talk about our service, we invite people to make a purchase or to respond in some way, and we think, well, we should be done there. That makes sense. Why would we
Mhm.
undo that by saying, but of course it's up to you, but the choice is yours, we'll only buy it if you want. We think, oh my goodness, that doesn't make sense at all. And yet there's something that behavioral scientists call the BYAF technique, but you are free. And they found that when you
Mm.
people, but you are free to choose, but the choice is yours, but it's up to you. it actually can double the likelihood that people will do what we ask them to do. And the reason is it taps into something called autonomy bias. And
Mm,
autonomy bias is this deep-seated desire that we all have to have some kind of control over ourselves and our environment, to have some kind of agency. And so when you remind people that the choice is theirs, that they're the ones who are in charge, that they're the ones who are making the decision, it actually can increase the likelihood that they make that decision. So that's kind of a counterintuitive way that we could apply behavioral science. So so I think I answered your question in probably 3 or 4 different ways, but
no, 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 it's great. It's great. That's last one. I love it because I even use it in the house, right? My boss used to tell me that people are addicted to having the last word. People are addicted to sounding right. They want to be the one that is right, and my my group, Nigerians, we almost sit at the top of that. We don't want to be seen as wrong, as it were. So basically you are placing the table in front of the audience, then you are influencing them without them even knowing. It's like you said, it's counterintuitive. Something I've been telling people of recent is, how about you create a campaign that allows people to get more from their product that they've already bought from you instead of buying another one. So basically, more marketers will say, "Oh, let's upsell you. Your, let's say, let's use the glasses. We are both wearing glasses. Your glasses is 2 years old. It's old. Buy another one." How about a campaign that says, "To make your glasses last 4 years or more, here is what you need to do." That may not make you buy two glasses from me in 4 years, but that creates even more trust, brand trust, like you said, in a way whereby people can then say, "I love these guys. They help you get more value for money," as it were, to you know, maybe sell more things or even stick with you forever, and things like that. So that makes a lot of sense. One funny thing I remembered with one of the myths that you mentioned is, on e-commerce stores, people will have this plugin that says you have 30 seconds to add to cart. I don't know if you've seen that before. Because if some people will go further and say only 10 left, add to cart now. But what really is happening is that runs every day. Next day you see only 10 left. Next day you see only 10 left, even though they've got more than 10. So guys, um, I don't have to tell you to be ethical in your influence, because I think customers are already getting cynical. The age of ChatGPT is even going to skyrocket it. Everybody knows everything these days. So if you think you want to fool the client with those kinds of tricks, I think people now can see through it, uh, so to speak. So that makes a lot of sense. Great, great, great wisdom. Your wisdom is so great that my studio is beginning to light up itself, which is very good. So I'll ask the next question so that I can light up them all. Hey, I've been very curious about this long-term question. Like I said, I am an avid psychology enthusiast. So I studied computer science, so nothing to do with psychology in a way. Even those who think no psychology, I can read them. And I've often seen two things when it comes to marketing. The first thing really is about trying to gain more. I've got two, I want to get three. And then the second thing is even losing the one so it doesn't become zero. So you've got loss aversion or avoiding loss versus looking for more gain, trying to get more gain. From a marketing perspective and in terms of maybe copy and campaigns and channels, would you say one is more common than the other? Have you seen any studies that show that if I give a campaign that says get it now before you lose it versus if I give a campaign that says buy one get one free, people will take different kinds of actions and they take more action on this side than on the other side. Like, have you seen that comparisons? Have you? And if you have, which one won the race basically?
yeah, it's a good question because in marketing we have always been taught to talk about the benefits, right? The benefits, the advantages, the gains, all the wonderful things that will happen if you say yes to my proposition, if you click the button, if you reply to the email, if you come into
Mm-hmm.
my store, if you pick up the phone, whatever it is,
Mm,
we focus on benefits and we know that benefits work.
mm,
But behavioral scientists have also, as you mentioned, identified the concept of loss aversion, and they found that people are twice as motivated to avoid the pain of loss as they are to achieve the pleasure of gain. So that would suggest to us as marketers that we want to have a little bit of well-placed loss aversion along with our benefits. We want to balance the message. So we don't want to walk away
okay.
from the benefits, but we don't want to just be focused exclusively on the benefits. Sometimes the opening volley, the first thing we say, uh, maybe should be loss aversion. I have a colleague
Okay.
who ran a head-to-head test, and his first line was, ISO certification, "Will your company pass?" And that's what
Mm,
the marketer was selling, ways to help you pass your certification. So it was ISO
mm,
certification, "Will your company pass?" And then he tested it against ISO certification, "Will your company fail?" And "Will your company
mm,
fail?" won hands down. It was the thing that got people engaged, that got them to pursue more information. And then, of course, ultimately they would end up doing business. And the reason they were doing business was so that they could pass their certification. But leading with that little bit of loss aversion was actually very powerful. Now, as we dig into it, there are some
mhm,
people that are more tuned into loss aversion, and there are some people that are actually more tuned into to gains, and they have kind of an abundance mindset. They want, they're really more motivated by what they can get, and there are other people that seem to be a little bit more motivated by what they can avoid. But generally speaking, if I had to come down on one side or another, I would say use a little bit of loss aversion. I've seen some very impressive campaigns where they talk about the fact that if you don't make the decision today, prices go up
mm,
tomorrow. And,
mm,
if you are interested in making this decision, if you're interested in buying this product, that's a very good motivator to make the decision today. 'Cause it's like, "Yeah, I was thinking about getting it, but oh my goodness, I better get it now because prices will go up tomorrow." I think we all love to save, because we could have said, "Get
mm,
it, it's on sale today." We all do love to save, but I think what we love even more is not overpaying. What we really don't wanna do is find out that somebody else got the exact same thing for less money than we did, and so that's why I think that loss aversion can be very powerful. That said, I have read some studies that show that the older we get, the less tuned in, I should say, to loss aversion we are. When
mm.
we're just not as susceptible to those kinds of messages. And I'm not entirely sure why. I suspect it might have something to do with just a perspective, where we're just not
Cynicism.
or maybe cynicism, but there's some research that shows as we get older, we just wanna focus on positive information. We just kind of crowd out the negative. Maybe we've lived these long lives and we just we can see the finish line, coming up on the
Yeah, I
horizon, we
know.
say, "I don't have any
Uh,
more negativity. I'm only gonna focus on the positive." But there are some studies that show that the older we get, the more focused on the positive we are and the less room we have in our lives for the negative. So that would suggest perhaps that if you're marketing to an older audience, loss aversion may not be as effective. And that's something I'm not sure about. I haven't run those tests, but generally speaking, I'm a big believer in using some well-placed loss aversion because I do think that people respond to it.
mm. I love that breakdown. And it's good that we are not expressing this as some sort of a silver bullet. Depends on your situation. In a way, it even depends on the product you are buying or selling. If you are selling a wallet, for example, a very good leather wallet, um, even if you use loss aversion, I'm not going to buy it because my wallet still works, right? So there is also that if I would just add. Okay, this is just so great. Next question. In your book, you mentioned the aspect of storytelling. While I was preparing for this, I thought to myself, um, yeah, I think we need to talk more about storytelling. I know there's a lot that has been said about storytelling, but you had mentioned something specifically about science that has shown that stories are more persuasive than other forms of communication. So, do you want to tell us more about that science? Was there some research? How did that advise your experience and, of course, your book?
Sure. So I mean, I think storytelling has become a little bit of a buzzword in marketing, but for good reason, right? We know that stories are engaging, they're involving, they can be entertaining, and stories were actually how information was passed from generation to generation before the written word. So,
Mm,
as humans, we're uniquely tuned in to stories. It's hardwired into us to learn from stories. But the advantages or the benefits to marketers go beyond that because it turns out that the brain actually processes stories differently. If we're just dealing with facts and figures, it involves two areas of the brain, Broca's area and Wernicke's area. Those are the two areas
mm,
responsible for processing language. But when we tell a story, we pull in other areas of the brain. If I talked about waking up this morning to the smell of hazelnut coffee, wafting under my door frame, that would activate the olfactory cortex in your brain, the part of your brain that's concerned with smelling things. If I told you that I went out for a run yesterday and I tripped over a tree branch and I smashed into the ground and I, bruised my chin or my cheek, that would activate
mm,
the motor cortex in your brain because you would be imagining me running and tripping and smashing and bruising, all these, these action words. And the net
mm,
is the more the more parts of your brain that get activated, the better you understand the information and the longer you remember it. So that's a definite scientific advantage to storytelling. But it actually even goes beyond that. There's a researcher out of Princeton named Uri Hassan, and he has a quote. He says, "Stories are the only way to activate parts of the brain so that the listener turns the story into their own idea and experience." And that is marketing gold, because if you can tell a story that allows you to kind of take your perspective and plant it into the head of your prospect so that they think of
mhm,
it as their own, I mean, that's fabulous. And that's the thing about stories, because when we listen to a story, we we get involved. There's something called narrative transport where we start to feel what the character is feeling. We start to experience what the character is experiencing. And as a result, what stories allow us to do is draw our own conclusions. And while we may argue with what somebody else tells us, our spouse, our business partner, a marketer, while we may argue with what someone else tells us, we rarely argue with our own conclusions. So when we're listening to a story, we get pulled in and we come to our own conclusion. And that's a wonderful thing, because then a marketer basically, pardon me, a marketer has you where
mhm.
they want you, right? It's like if you've come to the conclusion that this would be a good thing for you to do, a good service to sign up for, a good product to invest in, that's kind of unshakable. I think about there's an old Wall Street Journal control letter, the letter that worked better than anything else. It worked for 28 years, and it told a story about two young men. They had gone to the same college. They'd returned for their college reunion, and it turned out that
Mhm.
they both worked at the same company, but one of them was the president of the company and the other one was just a middle manager. And the story goes on to say that one of them subscribed to the Wall Street Journal and the other one didn't. And they never tell you that the one who subscribed became the president because he subscribed to the Wall Street Journal. But as you're reading the
Yeah.
story, you kind of get pulled in and you go, "Oh, I see. I see what the difference is. They were both young and ambitious and graduated from the same school and they both got employed by the same company, but one of them read the Wall Street Journal and the other one didn't." They say that it was responsible for $28 billion in subscription revenue. It ran for,
Wow.
was it 28? I'm sorry, not 28 billion. It ran for 28 years. It was responsible for 2 billion in subscription revenue. Um, but you hear these stories, and again, you get pulled in, you draw your own conclusion, you act on that conclusion. So these are some of the scientific reasons why storytelling can be so magical, so powerful to marketers. It's not just that stories are entertaining and involving, and a little bit easier to remember. It's that they affect the brain differently, and that people respond to them differently, and they draw their own conclusions, and they think of the ideas as their own. And once they're yours, you're very reluctant to give them up.
Ah, I like that. I mean, some people also say that they make themselves the hero of the story. Uh, Basically. So that makes, and thanks for sharing all those, very, very great examples as well. I think the worry, and this is just by comments, feel free to respond, is that stories don't necessarily get the revenue today. Like I want to run a 1 month campaign. I want to start seeing results from day two. Stories doesn't do that, right? I'm not going to run a think different campaign um and hoping sales will come in tomorrow, right? So they do take time, but they do last longer from a brand trust perspective. So I think marketing leaders are in that conundrum. I think a lot of people with more budgets are starting to create that concept of, okay, no problem, let's create a marketing laboratory and put this amount in there and just test whatever you are saying, right? But I think going forward, because of the shifting in consumer behavior, not just in B2B, but in D2C even, people are becoming more cynical and they want a brand that can communicate to them in a way that they can relate, right? And not, just, oh, buy now, buy now, buy now, buy now, buy now. Yeah, and all those call to actions that people tend to do. Stories sometimes are also not very easy to make. Sometimes you have to do it from an account-based system. Sometimes you have to do it, you have to invest so much in stock. Sometimes you don't have to invest anything. You might do something that eventually goes viral, for example. And then you have your virality index. And then that would, in the long run, help to build a sustainable customer base. Again, it's not about acquiring the customer or acquiring that lead. I think acquisition is very doable these days, but retaining those leads or even pushing them further down into the funnel. This is where storytelling is really, 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 really
Yeah,
important.
thinking about that lifetime value of the customer, it goes back to your eyeglass
Exactly.
example. You can make a sale or you can make a customer for life if you treat them the right way. If you say, listen, here's how you can extend the life of the glasses you're wearing. So that idea of lifetime value is really important. And and where the stories fit in. You're right. If it's an initial acquisition, um, message, it can be a little bit harder. I mean, maybe not impossible, but it can be a little bit harder. But as you move people down the purchase continuum, I think there are opportunities for more varied and richer stories. But even in acquisition, though, if you had a very succinct story about a customer who had a problem, who solved it with your product, that might even work as a story in the acquisition arena. But stories can be powerful, and they can absolutely be used, as you're saying, to build the brand and to build that lifetime value.
Yeah, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. We are content allies, for example, are addicted to stories. So we have tens of case studies at this point. We try to make a case study for every client, whether they churn or not, which is the incredible part. Making case studies based on clients that churn is just awesome. Of course, that's because they didn't churn because of us. It's probably because of something we couldn't control. So, guys, create more stories and see your business change. And if you're listening, I hope you have subscribed. This is how we do it at the Marketing Leadership Podcast. Is all about unique questions on common topics. The good thing about this episode is that the topic is very unique, and the questions I hopefully are very unique. I think I had like good question like 5 times, which is just so awesome. So, um, and don't stop at subscribing, guys. If you're listening or watching, also please place a review on the podcast. Whatever review you want, doesn't matter. We need those reviews to help us not just improve, or to continue to motivate us to do more, and also to poke the algorithms, as it were. And we'll just see how it goes with that. So we have a quick commercial break from our sponsor. And when we come back, it's going to be the dots rapid fire. And then we will wrap up the episode. But so far, it's been an interesting session in the Marketing Leadership Podcast. Stay tuned, guys. Welcome back, guys. So, like I said, is the dots rapid fire. Almost about to make a mistake there. And it's 3 questions. We call it the marketing court of law. You answer them with the truth and nothing but the truth. Are you ready, Nancy?
I'm ready.
All right. First question: what is your best marketing KPI? And I don't want to hear sales or revenue.
Ah, ouch. I was gonna say sales. That is absolutely, it's like That was where I was going. Sorry, sales.
Okay, I'll forgive you. I'll forgive. And I guess conversion rate, because most of what you do is about relevance. So our relevance is measured by conversion rate. So maybe click through rate in a way as well. If you add that in, if you write a good copy. Second question: how long do you use social media every day?
I'd say between an hour and 2. I'm on
Ah,
Facebook,
okay.
Twitter, X, whatever you call it, and LinkedIn. Probably about between an hour or 2.
Yeah, that's healthy. I do about the same too as well. Okay. Last question: what is your favorite marketing quote?
Okay, this comes from Dan Ariely in his book Predictably Irrational, and he says, we typically think of ourselves as sitting in the driver's seat with ultimate control over the decisions we make, but actually, that perception has more to do with our desires than with reality. And I love that quote. I might have gotten a word or 2 wrong, but I love that quote because he's
Mhm.
basically saying we think we know what we're doing, but really we don't.
That's true. That's true. That's for all you marketing analysts out there. Okay. So before I let you go, I have one last question, very special question. You talked about in your book the information gap theory. Some would call this, and let me know if I'm wrong, demand generation marketing. Which they say there are 100% of people that may need this product, 5% are already aware, 95 are not. So instead of telling them buy now, and they're like, what am I buying? Why not just educate them and give them information so that they can then get into the 5% box, and then over time the balance start to shift. So do you want to tell me about how you see that? Does it even align with demand gen? And I'm saying, as like I said, you mentioned something about novelty. How does novelty make information gap theory or demand generation better in marketing?
Sure. So there's a researcher named George Lowenstein, and he found that if there's a gap between what you know and what you want to know, you'll take action to close the gap. So if there's a gap between what you know and what you want to know, you'll take action to close the gap. And one way to point out that there's a gap is to use the 5 W's and the 1 H: who, what, where, when, why, how. And basically, what you're doing is you're offering new information that people don't have, and they want it. And the reason they want it, the reason people want the new information, humans are hardwired to seek out the new and novel because when we find something we believe is new, it activates the reward center in our brain, and that releases dopamine. And that's, among other things, a feel good chemical. So as a result, we're
Mhm.
constantly jonesing for that next hit of dopamine. We're constantly looking for the next new thing because when we think we found it, we get that rush of dopamine and that feels good. So that's why novelty is such a powerful force in marketing, as is information gap theory or the curiosity gap.
Makes sense. I know we could go on and on here. Maybe we'll have you back, but it's been an exciting episode. Thank you so much for sharing this great wisdom. Where can people find you? Where can they get your book as well?
Sure. So as I said, I'm on the socials. So LinkedIn, Twitter, X, Facebook. You can come to my website, which is hbtmktg.com. We abbreviate marketing, hbtmktg.com. And my book, Using Behavioral Science and Marketing, Drive Customer Action and Loyalty by Prompting Instinctive Responses, is available any place fine books are sold. Kogan Page, the publisher, Amazon, Target, Barnes& and Noble. I encourage your listeners to check it out. It's 288 pages, 17 chapters, and 25 different proven behavioral science tactics that are easy to apply that will automatically increase engagement and response.
I like that. And if you bought the book, just start with those 25, pick your best, and read every entire aspect of those. That is how I read them. And that's very, very good for you. So, guys, you want to see great episodes like this one? They are on my website, .lovesmarketing.com. You can also subscribe to the Marketing Leadership Podcast on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Special appreciation to Content Allies and Desk Rig for their support. And before I go, check out listennetwork.co. Listennetwork.co. If you want to take your podcast from bigger to biggest, we just crack the code. Guys, till next time, connect the dots.
Thank you for listening to the Marketing Leadership Podcast, brought to you by Listen Network. There will be links to resources mentioned in today's show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode.